Hi, my name is Jennifer Croden. I'm one of the Leukemia Fellows at MD Anderson Cancer Center. CLL is the most common hematologic malignancy in adults, and about 90% of CLL, we don't necessarily know why it happens, but in about 10% of CLL, patients have a very strong family history, meaning that they'll say that their father had CLL, their grandfather. It seems to be hereditary in some way. So that's about 10% of CLL. In about half of those patients, if you go looking for it, we've identified a gene that is associated with hereditary CLL, and that is called the POT1 gene. And so it is relatively a new phenomenon that has been discovered over the last decade or so, that this gene is associated with hereditary CLL. But what is interesting and important about the POT1 gene is that it's not only associated with CLL. It sort of creates, or patients develop a syndrome who have this gene. So they're at risk for CLL, but also other more rare types of cancers, such as glioblastomas and sarcomas, particularly cardiac sarcomas, among others. And so what's important is to identify these patients who have the POT1 gene so that we are able to screen them appropriately for other types of cancers. Now, those screening guidelines don't actually exist yet because this syndrome is a relatively new discovery. But what we are hoping is by publishing research into this POT1 gene, we're able to identify more patients who have this gene and establish some sort of screening algorithm for these patients. The other important thing about the POT1 gene, other than screening the patients themselves that are identified to have it, is screening their family members. Because what we found in our own retrospective look at the patients with the POT1 gene at MD Anderson Cancer Center is when you screen family members, about a third of those patients' family members already have a pre-CLL condition called MBL. So it seems to be a relatively strong link between this gene and the development of malignancies. And if we identify it in a patient, we can screen their family members, so we make sure that we're already looking into them and being able to screen them for CLL and other malignancies as well. So it's sort of a downstream domino effect. We are very lucky at MD Anderson because all of our CLL patients are investigated off the bat for many of these genes, including POT1. But you're right that many places in the community or at smaller centers won't necessarily have access to test for this gene in every patient. And so what I would say, and this is not based on any guideline evidence yet, but based on my own expertise, we ask every patient their family history, right? Do you have any family history of any other cancers? In patients who are giving this family history, either a very strong family history of CLL, multiple first and second degree family members with CLL, or you sort of see this collection of tumors, right? You have a relative with CLL, but maybe another relative who had a brain tumor and another relative who had a heart tumor. It should raise a flag in the oncologist's brain to say, hey, maybe this patient has a POT1 mutation, and then they can send the testing specifically for that gene. I don't think we have enough to say that every patient should be tested for POT1 at this time, but I think that when you start to hear that history from patients, that should sort of raise a flag in your brain to maybe look further into testing for that particular patient population. What's interesting and unique about POT1 is, so I guess I'll start with the fact that telomeres are part of the DNA in our cells that shorten over time, and it's associated with aging. And so in many cancer syndromes, what we see is that telomeres are actually shortened or more short than we would anticipate, sort of a marker of overall aging and dysfunction of the cell. That's sort of a common story we see in many cancer genes. But what's interesting about POT1 in particular is it's actually one of the few genes that's associated with lengthening of telomeres. So actually families who have this gene, if you do their telomere length testing, which is a specialized genetic test that we don't commonly do in CLL patients, what you will see is that their telomeres are actually longer than you would expect. And the connection between why those telomeres are longer than expected and the development of cancer has not been specifically teased out yet, but it's just interesting that it seems to behave a little bit more differently than genes for other types of malignancies. So we know that is part of the pathophysiology, but exactly how A leads to B is still being studied. I don't think we have enough data necessarily right at this time to say that if you have POT1, you're at exactly this percentage risk of developing you know, a glioblastoma or CLL, just because we don't know enough about the syndrome yet. But we do believe, and we do practice at MD Anderson, that these patients who have this gene should be screened differently. So we're in the process of publishing that and sort of making it official, what we personally do at our own hereditary leukemia clinic for screening. But we do believe that patients and their family members should be screened for CLL annually. So they should have their blood work checked. They should have things like an intermittent scan of the brain or an ultrasound of the heart to look for the development of some of these other tumors that can present with this syndrome. And so I think as more patients are identified, we'll be able to say things with a little bit more certainty about prognosis. But for what we're doing at MD Anderson, we are screening these people as a unique group. I think that we are living in a really exciting time for cancer research. I think that I am hopeful as a oncologist, very young in my career, I am hopeful that this era of personalized medicine and targeted therapies continues to evolve and develop. And I am hoping that by the end of my career, some of the, you know, classic toxic chemotherapies are sort of a thing of the past, and we'll be moving really on to patient individualized therapy that hopefully has a lot fewer toxicities. So the research that I've seen here at this conference has been so exciting, and I know that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we'll continue to see more and more of that personalized cancer medicine.